Hello. Okay, so I'm back again, and probably a quick stream, but better a quick stream than a stream. And I thought I'd do a little bit status update on the Isekai story, and as last time, I probably won't read anything more today, but I sort of talk a little bit about where I'm standing now, status-wise, with regards to the story, and I am currently writing on what I call the third part, and I have written the initial part, rather the initial the initial part of the third part. So the basically where they they talk about what they're going to do, and they travel where they're going, at least most of the way, and sort of setting up the problem for the rest of the story, or rather the rest of the immediate story, and that has so far progressed nicely. I managed to integrate some parts of the text that I have written earlier, and that was related to the end of this part of the story, and I have well gotten at least as far as I can get without having to think a little bit more about the details of what's going to happen. So I know where they are going. I know more or less what's going to happen. I can probably write the next couple of pages. After that, I'm not entirely certain of the details. So I'll have to think about that, but I have at least gone quite far for that part of the story. And the conflict that they are running into now, when that's more or less resolved, I have the rest of the story. The ending of this part 3, or the epilogue to part 3, or what you might call it, is more or less finished. I haven't written everything, but I have notes, and I more or less know what's going to happen, and so on. So basically what remains is to write the remaining bits of part 3, continuation from the point where I am now, and after I have done that, it should be mainly a question of finishing off what I have so far been talking about as book number 1. So that the end of that is within sight, actually. Probably take me a week or two to actually find out details what's going to happen, and write down everything, but it at least looks like there's a good chance that I'll be able to finish the things that I have been working on now. When I say finish, I mean finish at least in the sense of the first draft of the text. And I have also been thinking a little bit about what's going to happen after that, and I have a fairly good idea. I think I talked a little bit about this last time also, and I think I will go the route of traveling back to Earth. And there are problems with that, but story-wise, it's what fits best, I think. So I'm going to do it that way, and he'll travel back to Earth, and there will be some things going on there. And I have, if not exactly written down all the details, I had at least a certain idea of the sort of big events that are going to happen. And let's call it part 1 of book 2. I have a certain idea of what could happen then. So the question is really what's going to happen after that, and there are some alternatives, but it basically boils down to how much of the story should be set in other places than the fantasy world where he starts out in. And on one hand, I think perhaps it's a little bit too early to think too much about the details, but I sort of would like to have at least a certain idea of the direction in which things are going, and that means that I'll have to think a little bit about that. So what most likely happen is that the protagonist will go back to Earth to handle some things there, and to sort of clean up some, rather to... so he did die in the beginning of the story on Earth, at least most likely died, and naturally there were some events surrounding that, and him looking into that in some more detail, resolving those parts of the story, that's sort of an obvious thing that will happen. And then there's also the motivation for him traveling back to Earth. And then I have landed on, at least for a moment, him traveling back to the fantasy world, but at that point he will have first ended up being reborn in the fantasy world as a hero, and then he does various things in that world, which I guess you might consider heroic, might consider to be not extremely heroic, but anyway, he does have an impact on that world, and he makes friends and so on. And then he travels back to Earth with all that entails, and I guess the question becomes, is it possible to then travel back to the fantasy world afterwards and not have any involvement related to Earth at all? And I do... Well, I guess you could... Let's go through it. So there's... one alternative is he travels to Earth, he travels back to the fantasy world, and then never has anything to do with Earth again. Alternative B is he travels to Earth, travels back to the fantasy world, and after that both Earth and the fantasy world becomes part of the setting for the subsequent part of the story, meaning that also Earth will feature frequently in the story. And the third option is that he travels to Earth, then travels back to the fantasy world, but after that point, the fantasy world will be a minor part of the story going forward. So they will mainly concern themselves with Earth or other places than the place where they started. And if you look at the first alternative, short trip to Earth and then back again, and I think at least my suspicion, and this could of course be wrong, is that this will not work that well, because you introduce all these elements with Earth and the characters, various conflicts and troubles and so on that set on Earth, and simply just leaving that and returning to the sort of concerns and conflict that I had in the fantasy world. That seems my sort of suspicion is that wouldn't work that well. It could be that I'm wrong, but I think that this doesn't seem, at least from the distance that I'm watching things now, it doesn't seem like it would work out. So then we have alternative 2, which is that you have both, meaning that whatever conflict drags the protagonist to Earth is not fully resolved, and there will need to be involvement from both worlds in order to progress. And I guess that's okay. It's I guess it's always possible to find some kind of conflict in this case, but I think perhaps in this case I would build on that, so that for the last part that will be set out in space or something, so that you have a progression there. That unfortunately would mean that more or less leave the fantasy setting behind, unless there is some interesting twist there, but that's one way to do it. And there are some I have read some fiction where you have wizards in space, and that works well enough, I guess. I don't really recall any details. I don't recall the name of the book or anything, but I did read this book series where you had space wizards. They flew around in a spaceship, but you had a wizard that was doing some wizard things. And that's also one way to do it. So you have book 1 on Earth. So you have book 1 on the fantasy world, book 2 on Earth, so at least also on Earth, and then you have book 3, which is space story, and this seems like it could be a way to go forward. And finally, there is they start in the fantasy world, and then they continue to Earth, and then they more or less stay on Earth, and that's also something that might work. It would mean that the story would be slightly different. You have all sorts of anime and so on where you have you have characters with magical powers that run around doing various things in some kind of Earth current day setting, and you'd essentially just end up with that. So the conflict that causes the protagonist to travel to Earth. I have been thinking a little bit about what the sort of troubles they might run into when they return to Earth are, and there being some kind of conflict that Earth is involved in that's not obvious to average persons that are living on the planet. That's something that seems like it's something I could end up with. So in that case, you have some kind of enemy, likely with some magical aspect, and then you have the heroes fighting this. I guess this would solve another potential problem also, which is the it's called power creep, because many of the characters in the story, as I have structured it now, are quite powerful, and they could do is of course put them on Earth and say that, well, Earth is nice, but there's not so much magical energy there, so all those characters that relied on magic for their powers, they are suddenly not as powerful anymore. And that means that you book one is basically the background story for a typical anime setting. Put the Onyx and Ilareth and the other characters in a high school, and you will have a typical high school anime where you have many of the characters are magical creatures or have some kind of magical powers. And so this is also a possibility, but I don't know. It seems like it's less interesting to write. There are so many stories like this already. So I mean, it's the basically the setting for a huge portion of the anime series that are created each season. So that's perhaps not as interesting. So no, the more I think about it, the going the way of giving the non-fantasy setting a bigger part, and eventually going to space seems like it's the best approach. But the part of the reason why I'm a little bit conflicted is that the story bits that I have sort of brainstormed, they go to Earth and then they go back again, and the circumstances surrounding the return would imply that they couldn't go back to Earth in any simple way. What I could do is that I could say that they pick up some characters and let's call it resources from Earth, and then they use those in the fantasy world to confront this enemy that has been present on Earth. So that's one way of doing it, which should allow me to use that story that I thought out, which I thought was a little bit amusing. It's still quite far ahead though, so it will take me some time before I reach that point, but it's still, as I've been saying, it's useful to have at least a certain goal in mind when writing, so that it's not entirely random. But I do like the idea of the third part being in space. Was I guess I would severely limit my potential audience. Not that I think it's extremely large in the first place, but I guess I would sort of limit my potential audience by introducing not only current day elements, but also an Earth, but also space. But so be it. I think since I don't have any videos anyway at the moment, it's not like anyone is going to be angry and stop reading. So, but still, if I'm going a very different route, then it looks like at the start of the story I should perhaps have some I should perhaps have mapped out enough that I can at least hint at that being the case, so that those that are not interested in that type of story I can steer clear. They will see. The question of having an interesting enemy is also interesting. I'll see what I end up with. And I guess that's what I wanted to go through today, talk about today. So not any new part of the story that I'll be reading, but I still think I should at least have a little bit look at some of the text that is up next before I read that. There was this one bit that I knew I wanted to have a look at, so I'll get around to that eventually also. But for now, I think I'll say thank you for listening, and hopefully I'll be back again soon. Until then, bye bye.